The first report that has gotten itself into the top 5 is going to be coming from Nami Numako. So congratulations to you. And let's open up the report and take a closer look at it. So I'm going to quickly do one thing on the side here. Yeah. All right. So a couple of things that I noticed first when I opened up the report. I do like that there's a dynamic title here, but I would probably prefer it to be extended like a little bit longer than squeezed up in the center, mainly because otherwise it feels like everything sort of gets very clustered in the top right corner, right? You have the page navigation, you have the dynamic title, you have a slicer right next to it. So a little bit of a separation between those elements would be good. The other thing, and this is not just for this report, this is actually for almost every single one of the reports most of the time. Do pay attention to this one small little detail, and that is the visual headers. So visual headers are these little icons that you see right here. If you also hover over a table, for example, these are the drill downs, drop downs, extend, and so forth. All these elements usually have little visual headers, and you can disable them for the viewer. When you're developing a report, you're still going to have those. For example, if you need something to be expand to focus mode or something, you can still do that. You can still get the filters and everything. But for the viewer, it's not really necessary to see these unless they add some value. And the reason why I noticed this in a couple of reports is because, similar to how in this case you can see the visual headers are actually right on top of the button. So it becomes very difficult to read, for example, page names, KPI cards, depending on the elements and positions. But yeah, it's a very small little detail. But essentially, if you click on a visual, if you go to general settings, I think under general, it's visual headers, and you can disable them completely. Basically, just turn everything off, or you can allow some of them to be visible. Just play around with them and see what fits better. All right, what else? I like the little timelines that you have created here. The min point, max point. The only thing that I would probably play around with a bit more is if you're already using the colors, for example, red for increases in the number of complaints, decreases are green, and so forth. Don't try to reuse the same color for the min or the max. In this case, the max point, right? You want to kind of separate those because those are little identifiers or just something that drags your attention to it. So it would probably kind of try to approach it with maybe just black markers or whatever is in the color palette, just to kind of highlight those points, but don't try to kind of emphasize the point that it's the same color as basically a change, right? So that's one little thing. What else? The one thing also that I noticed in this one is be very careful when it comes to cross-chart filtering. Cross-chart filtering is a great capability because, for example, it allows me to select a year. I can drill down into months. Everything else also adapts based on my selection. So if I drill something, data is changing and adapting based on what I have selected and what's available. The issue with this is that you also have to be very cautious about making sure that you don't have same dimensions across multiple elements. Like, for example, we have a timeline right here, and if I select one of the years, you can see now I just have a little dot. Now I just have one little column. So if I select a year here, it filters everything. But if I select a year here, it leaves all of those years, right? So it's kind of contradicting a little bit itself. So what I would have done is keep this timeline as the main filter, and for these, just disable the cross-chart interactions. So they don't filter anything else on the report page. They're just purely visual elements. Otherwise, you have too many entry points for year slicers. You have it here, you have it here. If I open up the filter panel as well, you have a year here. So there's just too many places where people can accidentally, for example, do something with the years. Like, for example, select something here, close it. The filter gets applied for some instances, for example, then I clear it. And it's just one little thing that to kind of take a note of and make sure to play around with the reports. Guys, I've said this multiple times. Don't be afraid to play around with your own reports. Give it to somebody else to see what their first reactions are, what are their first interactions, because at the end of the day, the worst tester is actually yourself. And the reason why that is is because you know what to expect from it. You built it, right? You know what's going to happen if you click on one of the columns because you told the chart to do that. Now, what happens when somebody else tries to use the report? Their clicks are pretty much randomized. They click on this, they try this, they see what else happens, and all those little things need to be taken into account. I like this little approach with the change values. The only thing that I would probably do for the charts is I don't think the dark tooltips are a good choice. I would kept it with the light background, so it kind of fits more with the overall color palette of the report. That's one thing as well. Okay, if we go to the second page, nice scatter plot. Donut allows me to cross filter, so I can, for example, select a particular category if it decides to do that. It's slowly getting there. There we go. So yeah, I like that approach. A little info. It's a nice touch that you're explaining. For example, issues with average response over 15.09 are going to be flagged in red. The only thing that I would probably do with these little pop-ups is on the sides, always leave a little bit of space. Because right now, otherwise, it seems like, the text kind of gets squeezed into that bubble. Whereas if you would add just a few extra pixels on the sides, like 5 pixels more on both sides, it would look very nice, very nice. So small little details like this. Same principle here. So you're explaining what it is. Because I'll be honest, when I first opened up the report, right, I started to play around with, for example, okay, if I select this one, does it cross filter? Yes, it does. I look at the table, and then suddenly, for example, you can see there's no red markers here. I didn't notice the eye at first. So I was just scrolling, and then suddenly see one point with a red mark, and I'm like, "Mm, what does it represent? What's the meaning of it?" I try to play around with total, maybe it's based on total complaints, but there's different points. So this is a nice little touch. Uh, if you remember this percentage on the first page, and if you look at the second page, you have a different approach where you showcase the percentages. You're essentially using a different series. You're using it as a separate gap creator, basically, to push the value a little bit forward, and you have it within the column. I think this visually is a better approach than this, and I'll explain why. If we're looking at these columns right here, you can see that the name is right next to the values, right? We're right next to the category, which seems what would I expect. If I go to here, because the percentage is a second series, which is just invisible, transparent, it kind of seems like all the text are a bit off center, right? Because think about it purely visually, right? The main point that you are seeing is the column, because it's the most visual heavy object there. The percentages, the numbers are there, but the name always seems like it's a little bit offset. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but it's something that I noticed, and I would probably try to resolve it. Regarding the numbers, and this also pretty much like 80% of the reports that were submitted, guys, do pay attention to the number formatting. If it is in thousands, use the thousands separator. It makes the numbers a lot easier to read and understand. So yeah, that's one thing. And if we go through the third page, this is a nice little overview as well. What I would probably expect, because you're explaining it here within these the boxes itself, what, for example, right here, if they're flagged and so forth, I would probably maybe, it's a matter of taste, but I would probably duplicate the same element that you had already here. So the little eye, I would also put it up here, and make the blocks a little bit lower, so that again the top stays the same, but you have visuals and the title kind of in separate blocks, headers and canvas itself. The reason why I would do it is because you're kind of teaching me to use the eye here, but then here the eye disappears and you're giving me an explanation. So from a user perspective, why not the same? So maybe give the explanation also here, maybe rearrange something. Try to avoid kind of creating scenarios where people can ask questions or have doubts about certain solutions. stick to one particular approach rather than jumping between a couple of them. And one last thing, the little icons, never do this. If you have a size for the icon, keep it consistent across everywhere. Even if it means that you have to be creative with the naming of things. Like, for example, here, closed with monetary relief. You could have used, for example, closed, just a W as an abbreviation, monetary relief. That would give you a little bit more space. Or, if it's not possible, make these boxes a little bit bigger, maybe. Because otherwise, you know, kind of feels left out. This little poor guy is just left out a little bit. But yeah, other than that, I think it's a very good report. Uh, for me, few little things that I would probably change just to make it even more kind of readable and easier to use. But overall, you're in the top 5. Congratulations, and thank you for participating. Alrighty, then, let's go to the next one. So the next report that has gotten itself into the top 5 comes from Agbada Dixonokoloyo. So Agbada, congratulations. Let's open up a report and take a closer look at it. So, what I see about this report. Now, one thing that I kind of like about it feels very light. Because there is a little bit of background. You can see the canvas or the containers for the charts and so forth. But there is one issue that I have with it, and that is we have been talking about these measures quite a while, guys. If you're giving me a number for previous year, you better hope that it's referencing the last year, because otherwise, this number doesn't make any sense. So, if I highlight 2023, which is the last year, these numbers should not change. But it changes. So, the main issue or the reason why I'm talking about these is this is currently giving me false information because it's basically using a sum, right? It's taking all the previous years together versus the very last year, which is not really a previous year. Then it was previous period or something like that. But previous year is very specific. The other thing, number formatting. You have code 1000 separator here, you don't have it here. Consistency. Small little details, guys, right? It's not even massive things that are, for example, that we notice about these reports. Those most cases, those are just small little things, but those small little things is what makes the first impression. And you can only create first impression once. And if you're creating, for example, 1000 separators in one case and not using them in other, no offense, but it feels like you're doing kind of a sloppy job. You're not fully focusing on details or everything. You're kind of putting everything together. Even though the report works great, right? All the other details are fine. But these little things, they do matter. People do pay attention to them. So be very cautious about when you're creating these. Make sure the number formatting is the same. If you're using the colors mean the same. Here, for example, I don't have it selected, but there's one formatting for this, one formatting for this. Why not the same? At the same time, I think this is a very nice, interesting approach. You're essentially using the total and you're using a second series as basically a showcase of how far we are from the overall. That's a nice little interesting approach here. The timeline, that's fine. I can use the timeline to drill down into months, into multiple years if I want to. That cross filters the information. For the location, I have my different regions and everything. For the map, this is one of the tricky parts, and actually, we kind of did it on purpose because I wanted to see how you're going to be handling this. So for the map, you can see, for example, right here, I can't go any further. So what it means is Akbada has defined minimum zoom level that the user cannot go anywhere back. But the issue that I have with this is that, for example, if I, for example, filter out a month, you can see it kind of refocuses based on what's available in the data. Okay. If I remove the timeline slicer, so I have all the data. Sorry, I accidentally clicked. Let's go ahead and have all the data. Okay. Okay. Let's just click reset. I swear to God, today is not the day. Technology is against me today. All right, now it feels like it is. All right, so you can see it also again reshifted its focus. And the issue that I have here is that visually it seems like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna, kind of rearrange or reposition the map, and it's gonna be fine now. But in reality, we still do have data points in Alaska, and we also do have data points right here in Hawaii. This is why it's kind of skewing the map. And the zoom level doesn't help because it limits a certain viewport to only be visible. If we go, for example, for the previous report, you can see here, I still have the ability to, for example, zoom out. Sure, I can see all the other continents and countries, which isn't ideal, but at least I can see the overall picture. Here, you're kind of limiting me. So, what I would do is one of the two approaches. Either you allow me to zoom out so that I can see all the data points, or remember, you guys can modify the data sets, right? You can add additional data, you can remove some of the data, whatever helps you to create a story with the base itself. The alternative that I would do is just to make it simple, I would go ahead and remove or just filter out all the data that comes in from Alaska and all the data that comes in from Hawaii. I'm very sorry if I offended somebody from those states, if somebody's here from them. But remember, this is basically a playground, right? You play around with the data sets, you make adjustments to make the story look better. You can't always use the base as is, but you're more than welcome to adjust it. And this is one of the things that I would do, because if I remove Alaska and Hawaii, those data points are not skewing my view, and I could just easily, for example, position map of US like this. And I think you can agree with me. This looks a lot nicer than to have an entry point like, for example, something like this, right? Small little details. Sure, in reality, if the states are there, they're there, but this is a challenge. You can modify the data sets. But other than that, I like how these work together. So if I, for example, select South region, the map is going to refocus it based on that. I can use a sub-region as well, or census in this case. Again, it's going to refilter the data and only focus on that particular aspect. Conditional formatting has been applied to the map, which is a nice touch to kind of highlight or pinpoint the points which are, giving me more problems, I would say. Yeah, I mean, complaints are not really a great thing to have, right? So those regions need some additional attention. Showcasing based on products and so forth, so by sub-products, so that's a nice little touch. Going to the second page, similar setup, which I like, so that all the elements are not just jumping around. It's a very similar setup. Uh, but there's one thing on this map that caught my eye, and I was thinking if it's maybe forgotten or something. Look at the cards. So this is the first page, right? We have a little spark line, and this chart showcasing the percentage of total. Cool. If I go to the third page, spark line, percentage of the total. Cool. Go to the second page, spark line, exactly what I expected. Okay. And here I'm just like, did you forget about it? Or why is this little fella left kind of stranded? Worst case scenario, add the same spark line, just with a different metric. Because otherwise it feels like there's a lot of white space that is not being used for anything. I may try to filter or something. Yeah, but that's only going to change these numbers here. Still, this feels left out. So that's a missed opportunity. The cross filtering works. I can drill down here. The scatter plot. This reminds me very. It's just something I noticed, right? When I drill down, this reminded me of just a glop of toad poles. You know, visual representation. But no, I like it. I like also that you did add not conditional colors, but category colors, because if I would just have these little green dots without any outline, and if we get closer, for example, to some of these points, you can see if all would be green, in some cases it would be very hard to distinguish where sort of different points are being positioned, because all of them are very similar. The color allows me to see, okay, there's actually an overlap between multiple elements. So if I zoom in closer, okay, now I can see how they're being separated. So that's a nice little touch, I would say, as well, just purely from a visual standpoint. The little filter panel, I'd say this is something you might have improved a little bit more, because this X feels disproportionate to all the other elements, a little bit smaller maybe. But other than that, I think it's a very good report. Visually, it's very light. It's not very heavy with unnecessary information. I think it's all to the point. Yeah, map was my main point. Mainly probably because I was working with maps a lot lately, so started to notice these things a lot more. But yeah, congratulations and getting into top 5, and thank you for participating. So let's go to the next one. So far, guys, how do you feel about these reports? Do you like them, or wasn't your cup of tea? Let me know. So, third one. The third report that, remember, this is not the ranking, this is just randomized order. So, the third report that has gotten into the top 5 is going to come from Nina Ikpe. So, Nina, congratulations. Let's open up the report and take a closer look at it. So, it's not a secret. I've told this many times. First of all, remember, I'm not the only judge. There's more. I'm just one of the judges. But I love dark reports. It's what I like. I feel that for me, this is a lot easier to read. I know it's very kind of hard to work with dark reports because you have to be very careful with the colors and the contrasts and everything. But for me, I love this. Thank you. But I'm not the only one. So for this one, the main thing that I noticed about this felt very clean, right? Everything has its own position. It's not out of place. Everything is separated into blocks. It's easy to kind of navigate through it. So these are your main drivers. You have your KPIs, a timeline, and a few other dimensions. So in this case, you can see, for example, here, sure, I don't see the whole Alaska because then you would have to go very far away. But the zoom level is close enough that I can see that there's data points here, there's data here. So I can see all of them. So this is what I was mentioning about previously. I think the color choice is good. Initially, I was thinking that maybe there's one issue with having, for example, it as a color for the categories because it's not really representing because you have negative numbers here. But then I thought about the use case, right? It's complaints. So theoretically, if you look at it, the biggest issue is the one with the highest number of complaints. So the color kind of works for this. Because if I, for example, choose web, that is the biggest contributor. The data gets cross-filtered, all is good. Uh, the one thing that I noticed when I first loaded in, and this is just something with the label placement. So for example, if we switch between the pages, and if I do not touch the chart, you can see the labels are kind of stuck to the bottom. However, if I, for example, select one of the submission channels, suddenly they start jumping up and down a little bit. So there are a few things to note here. When you're working with labels, because I'm guessing what Nina did here is, I've shown this trick before, you essentially create a series which is assigned to the secondary axis, and then the secondary axis has an absurd range, so you can force the value to be at top, or vice versa, force it to be at the bottom. The trick though, or the one thing to always remember, is whenever you're doing this and the labels are at the top, at the bottom it wouldn't be an issue, but at the top, you can see some of the elements kind of go up and down a little bit right here. And that is because the toolbar by default is part of the chart. So whenever I get close to it, you can see the elements try to avoid it. So it's not going across it, right? So the trick here is in the formatting options of the visual, you can actually go into toolbars, and there's a drop down that allows you to define the position of the toolbar. So you switch it from inside to outside. And there's going to be a different report where this has been done, and I'm going to show it to you. The main reason why this would be beneficial is because then all these elements, so the back button, all the time periods, and the time display units, all get kind of forced up a little bit, and they become a separate area above the chart. So the labels are always also aligned and they're not jumping up and down. Again, very small little details. To switch this, open up the report. Yeah, I don't have it. I had it on my laptop ready to showcase, but you know, things happen. Essentially, open up Power BI, click on the visual, open up toolbar, switch inside to outside, save report. 5 actions, done. And that's how long it takes to fix this. But it's just a small little thing that I noticed. Probably because I was playing around with this a lot as well when I tried it out. But yeah, I like how clean it is. That is the main thing. If you go to the second page, company, this is a very unique setup, I would say. Never really, maybe I've seen this and I've forgotten, but I think visually it's very pleasing, right? So what you're doing is you're kind of doing a similar thing to this with the value labels, but instead of forcing it to go up and or down, you're creating an area and basically a marker which has a lot of space to showcase the value, and within it you have the value label. It's a very nice little interesting approach. So kudos to you for doing this. And by the way, when you guys look at this chart, do you see something interesting or something that kind of caught your eye? Because initially, I thought it's one single chart. Visually, it looks like that, right? And the only reason, I'll be honest, the only reason why I kind of figured out that those are two separate charts actually is because if you hover over it, you can see the line is this part right here. And if I go a little bit to the right, this is where the next chart starts. And I think you forgot to, for example, rename the series. So here, it's just a blank. And that is what caught my eye initially. I was moving around them, looking at the values, seeing how these are being created. Okay. And then suddenly, blank is 120. Wait, why is line blank? And then I figured out that these are two different charts that are just put right next to each other. I don't know exactly why you did this, but I'll be honest, it's a very well executed. Small little details, sure. The series, for example, names and so forth. And also, if you create, for example, any gap series that you don't need to be referenced within a visual, you can actually uh, go into the series configuration, and at the very bottom, there's a toggle that says enable in legend or enable in tooltip that you can use both of them. And in this case, if you disable that enable in tooltip or show in tooltip, I'll check in just a second. What it would do is you would still visually have the line there to create that gap and push the value a little bit forward. But within the tooltip, you wouldn't have just a series that doesn't really mean anything, right? Because the line is just a gap closer. Or in this case, it's the gap. But yeah, I think it's very well executed. I think the color palette has been chosen very nicely. It's not too bright. It works very well with what you've created here for these ones as well. The one thing that I would love is a little bit more drill downs maybe. Because in a lot of these cases, it's very sort of on a single plane or a single dimension, I would say, right? You don't have a drill down here. All of these are just single level charts. And if you go here, same. Very well executed. The colors for these two charts, probably most of you will not notice it. I don't know even why I noticed. Oh no, I know. The red one right here. The reason why I noticed is if you look at this red, you see the rounded corners? They're kind of very rounded. And if you look at the red right here, it's not as rounded as it is. And I did check the PBX. The two roundings are different. This one I think was set on 10% and this was set on 5%. So if you are using rounding for the charts, make sure it's the same across the board. Otherwise, if things get scaled, in some cases, if you, for example, using Power BI Desktop, the screen, most of the cases, for example, if you try it, because you have data panel, you have filters in some cases, visual panel, it gets kind of skewed a little bit, so it doesn't seem like the rounding is that big of a deal. But when you publish the report to a service and you look at the embedded version of the report, it rescales. So the rounding becomes a lot more obvious, right? And this is one of the reasons why you have to make sure that if you are using rounding, it's the same across the board. Don't get me wrong, it's not always easy to set it perfectly, because with Power BI elements as well, certain cases you use points for rounding. In some cases you use pixels in rounding or percentages of rounding. So different setups. What else? The little search for the company ID, very good. The only problem is, remember what I said to you a couple of minutes ago? Play around with your reports. If I cross filter from here, all Gucci, working fine. Perfecto, all is cross filtering. Drill down is working. But then a single click on a table works fine. If I reset everything, so I now have all the cases, if I click, the donut just stops working. And the explanation is also quite simple. We don't accept blank values. So blank values have to be replaced with either a null or a zero. Zero is a value. And if you look right here, because that is a legend for that chart, we have overall 0.01% of cases, or only 8 cases of all the 61,000, which are closed. But in most of the cases for individual companies, it is a blank value. So it cannot be parsed properly, and that breaks the visual. And the reason why I noticed this is actually because you had this little nice company ID. Because there was one other report where this wasn't included, and I was hoping it would be. And all I did was basically 0023, for example. I'm looking for a company with this ID. And then I noticed that the donut chart broke down. And then I started to investigate and found out that this is the culprit, the closed cases. Because it would also just be better if you have 0%. Or not applicable if it's a textual value. Yeah, small little details. What else? I think that's most of it. Oh yeah, the filter panel. This unfortunately feels like it was added at the last minute. Because if you look at the overall color palette and everything, sure, you're using white as a contrast color. But for the filter panel, I would just basically use either this dark blue or this. I would do. Wait, where was it? I would go with similar approach as you have here, basically. I would have a container with an outline that is in darker. And then I would have the light color, which you have in the charts, as a background, maybe? Or the background color, yeah, for these selections. Because otherwise, this semi-transparent white one, it feels rushed, added at the last minute. But until then, I really like the design. So kudos for that. That's a good one. All right, so the next report that has gotten itself into the top 5 is from Crystal. Crystal, if you're here, congratulations. Yet again, another top 5. So congratulations on that. Let's open up the report and take a closer look at it. So starting from the top, consumer financial complaints, complaint overview. Okay, there's a timeline. The first thing I did is, as soon as I saw this, and you probably know what I'm about to do, right? That is the full range. My question is, if I go into a particular year, does it change? Yes, it does. Very good. So you're not just giving me a period of time, but you're also adapting based on what's visible. Very good. Um, the the design itself, I think it's very clean and nice. It's also very different in a way that these fonts are not typically used, and it kind of makes it feel a little bit different than what is out there. But there is one thing when it comes to design that I personally would change, and that is this chart right here. I would most likely, for the timely response rate, use the darker orange color. Because again, remember, one of the things you have to account for is that what you see on your screen is not going to be exactly the same thing that other people see on their screens. What I mean by this, the contrast, the brightness settings of the monitor, and so forth. The monitor itself, how much of a HDR, for example, if it's using it, then these sort of things. So how much of the colors are being enhanced. And in this case, I feel they're very close to each other, and it's lacking the contrast aspect of it. The darker orange would work better. That's my opinion for this one. Uh, First thing I did, right? We just tested out the donut chart, selecting one. Sure, I can have cases where only one single instance is left, but none of the charts break. Very good. Uh, this table as well for it's a different approach. Instead of using just a bar chart, for example, you're actually using a table, and the table has two different columns. You have the values separately. Within total complaints, I'm guessing that also was a number, but you're essentially just creating that into a data bar. So a different approach on how to showcase also a combo chart. Well, yeah, bar chart. I like it. So that was pretty nice. This was an interesting one. So total complaints. And one little detail that I like here is that you have pre-filtered this based on name. And the reason why I like it is because if I select, for example, a year range or something, you can see that, sure, some of them may get excluded because there's no value for it, but the order stays the same. You could have done what typically people tend to do is sort everything based on value. But then again, everything is kind of jumping around based on how much you have within it, right? So I think sorting by name also was a very nice choice. Kind of works very well with the overall feeling of the report. Yeah, compliance here. If you go back to this one, the two different series, that's fine. Tooltips. Why are you mixing dark tooltips and light tooltips? If you're using the dark mode for some of the elements, use it across the board. Again, it's one of the consistencies, right? And of course, what I also like about this is the little filter panel. I think it's a very nice execution itself. And the one thing that I kind of like about it mostly is you're keeping the report clean. And for example, this is something you can do in your company organization. In company or reports, it's a little bit easier because everybody knows it's for the same company, so you can have a logo right here. But in your case, if you're creating a portfolio or something and you want to reference, your consulting firm or something, it's a very nice way on how to kind of hide some of the references. I think it's very, very well executed. The only thing I would change it out a bit is close and clear. That they're fine, but my first reaction or sort of interaction, not yeah, my interaction that I did was when I open up the filter panel, I wanted to click it again to close it, but this only opens it. So on the very first glance, because I didn't check everything, and this is just because I've been using Power BI for too long probably now, but if I open it up, I wanted to click on it again to close it because it's typically how things work, right? I didn't scan the whole thing. I saw clear slicers first, so I'm looking around and there's no way to close it. Is this really the only way? And then of course I opened it again like, oh, okay. So I think it works, but for me personally, I would make the triangle go one way to open it, and when it's open, the triangle elements would be duplicated. You rotate it so it looks the other way, so it kind of showcases a closing action, and I can open and close on the same item. For the user, it feels like it's the same item. For in reality, those are two different items with two different actions, because one item cannot have multiple actions. So yeah, I like it. Same again for the map. The zoom level is 3. As we can see, the developer tool has been enabled. So I can still zoom out, but level 3 works just fine. There's enough space and room for the visual. It's not being kind of squeezed together. Sure, I don't see the full Hawaii. A little bit of it gets cut off. I don't see the full Alaska, but I see all the data that there is. I'm not getting a skewed version of it. And if I cross filter something, sure, in some cases it's going to get closer. If I, for example, use fax, probably not a lot of cases for it. Oh, actually, California is using it most. 2021. Yeah, we can see some data is still there. So one of the tricky points. But yeah, I think overall it's very well executed. And if I'm not mistaken, Alexandra can of course correct me on this, but I think there's also a shout out from our team regarding the design that they really liked it. It's a very good approach. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth report that has gotten into the top 5 is from Emmanuel Idol. There you go. I just saw Emmanuel in the chat. So Emmanuel, congratulations. You're also in the top 5. All right, let's open it up and take a closer look at it. So, my point of view, these cards, or specifically these pictograms, are a little bit too much. I would probably use a more simplified version of it. I'm not against these, but I think in the rest of the report, it feels like these are just a little bit too much. But it's just a design, very easy to fix. Other than that, you have a top menu where you have KPIs, add filters. Add filters, I'll be honest. From a design perspective, I felt like it kind of doesn't fit there. Like it should be in a different place, like maybe up top or something. But or maybe it fits there. You can. What do you guys think? Does it fit here? My feeling is that it should be probably top right, but you don't really have enough space for it. But this is the first time that I've seen somebody actually create a filter panel like this. I've seen similar setups, but this particular way I haven't really used. But I think it's a very, very cool approach that you did here. If I open it up, you can see these little buttons, right? The first reaction is, oh, probably that's a drop down where I can click on it and get to the values. What Emmanuel has done here is if you click on these, this actually opens up the secondary block, which has a slicer with either a list or a drop down, depending on how many there are, of those particular filters. So, for example, you can see there's 2 of them here. And you're following the rule that I said that if there's only a few of them, you don't need a search. If you don't see all of them and there's a scroll bar, you need a search. So I think it's a very clever way on how you've done this. I love this. And the only small little thing, and this is just because I've been working with the design team a lot, with the report overhauls and everything, they would eat me alive because of this little pixel that you have here at the top and 1 pixel at the bottom. So the shape, just move it down a little bit. That's it. But again, these fixes, come on, guys, right? Open up the Power BI file, open up the filters menu, move the element, save the report, done. A lot of these things that I'm saying are not massive changes to the report. Those are small little details, but all those little details matter massively. Uh, Also, maybe I know slicers are infamous for not being very design friendly because there's a lot of things that you can't do with them. Uh, but I would maybe go with the drop downs or try to add a little bit of a background for the slicer for one purpose only. The checkboxes are in gray and I can barely see them on my screen. Maybe it's different for you guys, but I can barely see these check marks. Because I know how slicers work, I knew what to expect. But when I opened up first, I was looking and I was like, "Is this like a table with top responses or companies or issues?" But then I know that those are slicers, but because that little checkbox is almost invisible, pretty tricky. But the filter panel, mwah, chef's kiss. I like it. All right, what else? The timeline, comparing two different values, showcasing the change, no issue whatsoever. The donut chart allows me to filter on specific regions. Yeah, but there seems to be a little bit of a problem with the data because you can see I still have these points and they should not exist if I have filtered them out. The map should readjust itself if I select south. It should go to the south. So if we go, for example, for crystal, not crystal didn't have it. This one had it. So if I click on south, I want the map to reshift the focus on the south. Right? You're focusing on what's visible and what's available. But yeah, again, not massive changes. You can easily adjust that as well. The scatter plot has a drill down. Fine. I would love to have maybe a dynamic title because these currently have no name and I have no clue what they are unless I hover over and hold it. But adding a label to it or something would make it feel a little bit more dynamic. Sure, you can disable the overlap and that sort of thing, but having at least, when I have like, let's say, three little dots like this, I would love to just see the names so that I can give it to somebody. Otherwise, if you give this to somebody, they're going to come back to you and be like, okay, what's the blue? What's the gray? What's the brown? Right? You can see it if you hover over it, but having the name would also be very beneficial. Okay, go to the products and issue. These are okay. Here, I love this approach initially, but the problem is that you're talking about the same dimension also here. So if I select one of them, dun, 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 three cards are saying the same thing because that is the pre-filter. Select again one. Ding, ding, ding. It kind of becomes obsolete as soon as you interact with something. So I get it's a tricky one, but I would probably the value within the card actually showcase the top, for example. I would change the title as well, maybe just explaining that that's the top one. So have sort of a fixed top, the numbers would change and so forth, but this would allow me to see overall what are the slowest product responses and so forth. High severity issues, that's the one that changes, yeah. But the rest of them feels like a missed potential. The little insights, yeah, that's a nice touch as well. If we go here, now this is one of the cases where I would have to say that these charts do not work. And I'll explain why. If you ever are comparing values which are on completely different scale levels, you do not want to have them side by side like this with two different columns. Usually those series have to be also represented in different chart types, like for example column versus a line or something like that, or a markers as a percentage somewhere, or just have, I would probably do the following. I would keep the complaints per percent of market share, so the numerical value, and the percentage value, I would execute the same way as you did here with, for example, the comparisons. Just have a percentage at the top. That's what I would have done here. Because otherwise, this feels like there's a little bit of increase or something, right? But these values are not comparable. One is the amount, one is a percentage. So it's very tricky kind of to read this chart. Similarly here, you have cases, total complaints with, tens of thousands. But then right next to it, you, for example, have a column that has the same height, but it's talking about the response time and days. If you do have different values that you want the user to switch between, remember field parameters is an amazing option for that. Yeah, that's one thing. And the last thing that I noticed here, and this is again, something that I wanted to quickly showcase, but unfortunately I don't have PBIX by hand right now. Uh, this one right here. So when you're talking about these values, what you're doing is, and I checked your PBIX file as well, you're creating a line that doesn't have width, so it's based on 0, and there's no visual representation. So you have total complaints, okay, that's in gray, total time of response, okay, that's in brown. I have something that is untimely response rate. So what you could do here is, our markers are respecting what you're doing with the series by default, right? Unless you change it. But what I would have done is I would change the series into a column. I would put it in a different cluster, because if you're going to change this into a column, it's going to go right next to it. So it's going to squeeze everything else together. But if you make it a column and set it to a different cluster, it's essentially would be staying right here in the back still. You still keep it transparent. You still keep the numbers, but for the column itself, you enable conditional formatting. And what that is going to do, it's going to create a conditionally formatted square right here, with the top being, for example, green, bottom being red. So that indicates for the user that this is the conditionally formatted series, which is the percentage at the top. So that's the one thing that I would do here as well. Other than that, I think you had an amazing report, a lot of nice little things and features, kind of approaches that you tried out. The filter panel, loved it. Like I said, chef's kiss for that. But yeah, congratulations on getting into the top 5. All right, enough chit chat. I think it's time to announce who's the winner, right? We've gone through all 5 of them. So if Alexander, you could hide my screen for just a second. Whoosh. There we go. Now let's find the winner. I'm just gonna double check, Hey, you don't want to be the dum-dum who shows the wrong report. Okay, I got the right one. Okay, we can push it back to the view. So the winner of this month's challenge for Onyx Data is Para Dixon. Congratulations, man. Yeah, like I said, I'm not the only judge. There's other people involved into this, and overall, through all the features, the data you have set up, or the data story elements and everything, overall, we think you are the winner for this month. There were some close runner-ups. I can tell you that, but based on points and everything that we provided, your report won the challenge. So congratulations to you, man, and best of luck in all your future endeavors. For the rest of you, for those of you who didn't win, no stress. It's okay, right? The winning of the challenge is not the only thing you should kind of pursue. You're learning new things, you're trying out different approaches, you're creating your own portfolio, you're seeing what other people are doing. So this is a learning environment, right? Winning of the challenge is just a bonus. Think about it like that. The true goal is getting all the skills, the feedback, the basically the environment where you can play around with things, right? That is the main thing.